Apple just announced the brand new Mac Studio with the new M1 Ultra chip, and they gave us a ton of info at the event that's blowing people's minds, but there are actually 13 things that they did not mention. Some might be on purpose because they're negatives, while others are actually positives, and we also have some differences between the two configurations that they are advertising on their website. So today, I'm not gonna waste any of your time telling you exactly what's already out there, but we're only gonna cover what Apple did not talk about. And starting out, we have to talk about performance. Apple made a huge deal about how much faster it is than everything else, both on Intel's side with their new Alder Lake and the Mac Pro with the Intel chips up to 28 cores, saying that it's 60% faster, 90% faster, these crazy amounts. But what they didn't mention is what programs they're actually testing and how that applies. Now, we do know how the M1 Max performs in terms of CPU performance, and this new Ultra is literally two of those chips connected together. So if we take a look at the performance of the M1 Max, and in Cinebench, the best score we got was 12,600, and we double that, we get a score of 25,200. Now that is an incredible amount of performance, especially in that package, but that 28 core in the Mac Pro, that scores about 28,000, so more powerful than this M1 Ultra in terms of 100% CPU load performance. Now, compared to Intel's latest 12th generation Alder Lake, the 12900K that they also compared it to on stage, that scores about 27,000, once again having more raw performance. Now here at MaxTech, we also know that benchmarks aren't everything, because depending on the program that you're using, these Apple Silicon chips could be so much faster even though the raw performance is worse. For example, my $15,000 Mac Pro gets smoked even by MacBook Air in certain tasks because of software optimization for these unified SoC chips that have really high memory bandwidth, a lot of memory channels, and dedicated decoders and encoders that make it really fast. So we will have to see how these computers compare once we get them in. And we actually ordered 3 Mac Studios, 3 different configurations to test out and compare. So we will see how it stacks up against Intel's Alder Lake with an RTX 3090 with real projects, not just the charts that Apple showed off. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button down below if you guys don't want to miss that video and to help us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers. Now for number 2, we have to switch over to graphics and talk about the M1 Max, which might seem kind of boring because we already have it in our MacBook Pros, but there's one thing that they didn't mention, and that is the wattage and the frequency. We know that even in the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the M1 Max only peaked at 46 watts, being maxed out completely when the design is a 60-watt chip. And with Apple's graphs, when they compared it to other GPUs, they show it off as 60 watts. Now that might mean that if you're getting an M1 Max in a Mac Studio, it could actually perform better than the same chip in the MacBook Pro, so we could get some extra performance there. Now the third thing that Apple didn't mention is the fact that the M1 Ultra has a different cooling system than the same Mac Studio with the M1 Max. Now we first saw this by comparing the technical specifications and seeing that the M1 Ultra is almost 2 pounds heavier than the same Mac Studio with the M1 Max. Now of course the actual CPU SoC is larger, but that can't account for a 2-pound difference, and my thought was that they could literally have a different cooling system with maybe even a single fan in the M1 Max, because that's enough for it, but upgrade for the higher end one. But today morning, we have some new news where Apple replied to The Verge and gave him info that the M1 Ultra actually has a cooling system made out of copper instead of aluminum. Now, we don't know what other differences there are in terms of size, fans, or anything like that, but we do plan to take these apart, both configurations, and take a look inside as soon as we get them. So make sure you guys' notifications are enabled. And we also know that copper copper is about 3 times heavier than aluminum, which definitely makes the whole system heavier. Now, if this copper cooler is a lot better, that could also mean that the M1 Ultra might not be any louder or hotter, and it might actually be less hot and less loud than the M1 Max. And that's something we love to dig into and test like we have with the MacBooks and previous computers. Now for number 4, we found something very interesting about Apple's charts in relation to the M1 Ultra. We know that the M1 Max runs at up to 60 watts and they showed that off, but for the Ultra, we only saw it running at about 105, which is not double the scaling. Now that could mean that Apple are limiting either just the wattage or even the frequency, just like we saw in the MacBooks. And the highest end 64 core graphics M1 Ultra might not have perfect scaling compared to the 48 core version, meaning that you're paying a lot more money, but not seeing, a linear increase in performance. And we saw that with the M1 Max in the MacBooks, where the 24 core was the sweet spot. So we will test out that 48 core versus the 64 and see how much faster the 64 core actually is. Now with that, the next one that we need to talk about are the prices. When Apple showed off the prices on stage, we saw that $2,000 model, which was lower than expected, and the $4,000 model, which was a big jump. But then when you went into their configurator online, you saw that the $4,000 isn't the 64 core that they gave us all the performance numbers of, it is actually the 48 core version. And even though going from the 24 core bin $2,000 one, it's only $200 to get the M1 Max with 32 cores, the jump for the 64 core is much bigger than that. And that leads me into number 6, and that's the fact that even though Apple advertised those high-end configurations, most people don't need them. When we see all those scores, we want to buy that, but you have to keep in mind that when you're spending that extra $1,000, you're only getting some extra graphics cores. You don't get any more bandwidth, any extra encoders or decoders, ports, none of that. And unless you are maxing out that 48 core M1 Ultra, in most workloads, you're not gonna see much of a difference spending that much more money. And like I said, that could be the sweet spot. Whereas online, when you're looking at Apple's prompts as far as the GPU cores and even the RAM, they say, well, if you think that you're gonna need more, you can't upgrade it later, you should probably think about it doing it now. They want you to do that. But as we know, when we did our RAM comparison, we saw almost no difference between even 32 and 64 gigs just because of how well the unified memory works. So most people don't really need to spend $1,800 extra. Now, I actually made a guide for people that are buying the Mac Studio, helping you guys decide what configuration is best. So if you guys wanna watch that, you can see it after this video. Now the next one has to do with that HDMI port. They showed it off, they showed it connected to a 4K TV alongside monitors, but it does not come with HDMI 2.1, meaning that you're limited to 4K 60 Hertz, which is really weird because so many TVs now are coming out with HDMI 2.1, new consoles are, different graphics cards, so this port is definitely limited. And that leads me into the next one, and that is thankfully, even though on stage they said you can connect up to 4 6K XDR monitors, and in the past that always meant if you buy the highest end configuration, you could do up to that many. But in this case, if you're somebody that wants multiple displays, you don't have to buy the M1 Ultra. Even the base model can actually support 4 of these displays, which is really awesome to see. Now, the next one is also with those ports, and that is the fact that these are Thunderbolt 4 ports, meaning each one of those ports has its own controller, meaning that if you need more than 4 Thunderbolt ports, you don't have to buy the M1 Ultra to get the extra 2 to be Thunderbolt in the front, because you can buy a simple OWC hub, and each one of those can actually turn into 3 Thunderbolt ports without limiting your bandwidth and still giving you a lot of flexibility. Now the next one is the power usage. Now sure, Apple talked about peak power usage and how that compares, but they didn't mention the idle power usage, and we just found that online, and it is an insanely low 11 watts. Now, just to blow your guys' mind, if you buy the cheapest, weakest 8-core Mac Pro, when it sits there not doing anything, it uses over 100 watts of power. And if you get a fully loaded 28-core model, that is over 300 watts of power, which is absolutely insane. Whereas the whole Apple Mac Studio is less than that. Even if you're maxing out the GPUs and you're maxing out the CPUs and running a display, it's just crazy how efficient these things are. Now, the next one that is very interesting is that when we saw this thing being revealed, and it's basically a big Mac Mini, that actually didn't mean that they replaced the Mac Mini, at least the Intel version. When you go on their site, they are still selling the Intel Mac Mini, which blows my mind. And what this means is that if the $2,000 Mac Studio is too expensive for you, you don't need the M1 Max, you might have wanted an M1 Pro, Apple does have that in the works. So they're still gonna be putting out another Mac Mini, named the Mac Mini, that will come in at that lower price point, better than the M1, but cheaper than this Mac Studio, so you guys can hold off for that. And then the last one that I want to talk about is that this Mac Studio might be a replacement to the 27-inch iMac, at least for now. When they talked about it on stage, they kept referencing the 27-inch iMac and how much better this is, and then right after the event, they took the 27-inch iMac off their website completely, so it's only showing the 24-inch M1 iMac now. Now, that literally means that instead of buying an iMac, Apple wants you to buy a Mac Studio and this new display, and it kind of makes sense because they want to recoup the R&D costs of creating this display. They stopped doing it before because it was just too expensive, didn't make the money, but now that they're coming back out with it, they would rather have more people buy this instead of buying an iMac. There's still a big jump in pricing from where the iMac was, the 27-inch for $1,800, and now if you buy this display and the cheapest Mac Studio, you're looking at $3,600. So hopefully at some point we get something else, but at this point the Mac Studio basically discontinued that 27-inch iMac. And then the last one, actually this is the last one, number 13, is AppleCare. This Mac Studio is all sealed up. Even though we are gonna take it apart, Apple doesn't really want you to, and because so many people are worried about not being able to upgrade and the memory going bad or the SSD, Apple is now giving us AppleCare. That is a yearly subscription that doesn't just expire after 2 or 3 years. This can be running indefinitely. Now, $60 a year, I don't know what you guys think about it, if it's expensive or not, but if you just spend $8 grand on a Mac Studio, you spec it out completely, being able to cover it for $600 for 10 years, making sure year 5 or 6 or 7 down the line, if something goes wrong, it is fixed, that is really nice, instead of only having coverage for the first 3 years, and then when stuff starts wearing out, you're out of luck. So this is really cool that Apple is allowing you to have this extra peace of mind. So there you guys go. That is 13 different things that Apple did not mention at their event that we now know. We'll be getting 3 of these as well as displays and other accessories very soon, doing comparisons, teardowns, showing you guys all of the information that most people don't cover. So make sure you guys subscribe by clicking that circle above. Check out one of those excellent videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.